Hello and welcome. Please take a chair, but not just any chair. This is a 1970s classic plastic strap woven aluminum folding lawn chair. So did you take this chair, or did this chair take you to maybe your backyard, 4th of July, sparklers, a wiffle ball game, or maybe you picture it folded in the back of a station wagon with you seated facing backwards, of course, heading somewhere back in time. For me, this chair takes me back to 1974, and the nexus of my talk to you this morning, how we play informs who we become. Because in my boyhood backyard, three things came together because of play. It was inventiveness, a deep curiosity, and a real passion for playing. And that informed who I would become. But before I take you back to my boyhood backyard, I want to talk to you about play. What it is, what it isn't, and maybe figure out how we perceive it. Dr. Stuart Brown, author and founder of the National Institute for Play, says that play is an experience. Talking about play is like shooting down a bird of paradise in flight and dissecting it. So I'm going to try to talk about a fun subject without wringing all the fun out of it. So I like this 4-part definition of play by Peter Gray. The first part is that play is self-directed. Players are always free to quit. Because it's self-directed, that means if what you're doing is something that you feel obligated to do, then it ceases to become play, right? And because it's self-directed, play is very personal. What you find terrific, I may find terrifying. Or play to me might be tinkering, but that to you might be absolutely purposeless. Secondly, play is an activity in which the means are more valued than the ends. This is difficult for competitive people to get, right? Because they're all about the winning. But if we want to get the most out of play, we need to focus on the journey, not just the destination of play. Thirdly, play is guided by rules, but the rules leave room for creativity. I think we're most alive when we're creating. And of course, there's a framework to play, but we want to leave room for some surprises. And fourthly, play is conducted in an alert, active, and relatively non-stressed frame of mind. So, like watching your favorite sport or watching a movie with your family, those aren't really play, because play calls us to be participators, not just spectators. Now, as a play advocate, I am aware that not everyone shares my enthusiasm for play. In fact, in our Western culture, work is valued and play is sort of looked at as a 4-letter word. Brian Sutton-Smith famously said the opposite of play is not work, it's depression. But still, the picture that society paints of play is not always pretty, and we can kind of see that in some of the expressions that have entered our lexicon. Like, for instance, if you play around, you're a philanderer. If you play the field, you're a cheater. If you play on my emotions or my fears, then you're trying to exploit me. Something that's played out is stale or overused. If you play down something, you're making light of it. If you play for time, you're stalling. If you play at something, it's as if you're passing yourself off as something that you're not. It can also mean that you're going through the motions, as in she's just playing at being nice. Play has a PR problem. So I want to look at this perception of play scale that I put together, and you can see where you are on this scale, and it also can help you to inform your friends that you want to encourage to play more and push them a little bit to the right on the scale. So if your perception of play is poor, if you think that play is pointless, then you're going to be annoyed by play, because to you it's pointless. If your perception of play is that it's petty, it's frivolous with little or no value, then you're sort of apathetic about play. You can take it or leave it. If your perception of play is positive, if you can easily see the benefits of play, then of course you're going to be amused by play. But if your perception of play is profound, if you think play is a means through which you connect with the people that you love, if you believe, as I do, that it's a means through which our brains and our being are actually formed, then play for you is going to be amazing. No matter where you are on this scale, I hope that by the time this talk is over that I nudge you a little bit to the right. But I hope you see by the time I'm done that play is not an elective luxury, but absolute fundamental necessity. Let's look at the big picture. The planet plays. There are a lot of critters on this big blue ball, right? Object play is a really big thing. Look at this guy with his stick. Who's a good boy? So a dog with his stick, an otter with her stone. That's object play. There's play fighting in the animal world, like these bears, crows, parrots, rats, ferrets, even insects. It's estimated that 80% of mammals play. And there's some evidence that the bigger the brain of an animal compared to its body size, the more it plays. And you could argue that that's why their brain got so big, because of play. And play is essential, and we know this because think about it. Look at these bears who are play fighting. By the way, don't they look like they're telling a joke to each other? This guy in the snow blind's been sitting there for 5 hours. Isn't that hilarious? No, they're play fighting. And why do they do it if it wasn't essential? Because think about it. They live in the harshest of environments. They need to find food and water and shelter or they're going to die. And yet they use precious resources, time, energy, in order to play. Play has survived not because it's silly, but because it's selected. There's a creativity in play that allows animals to explore their environment, for sure. But more importantly, it allows them to assess their own abilities within that environment. And think about how important that is for a young animal, how important it is for them to know how fast they can run, how high they can jump, how loud and scary they can be if they need to, and how quiet and still they need to be if they need to. They learn all those things in part through play. Animals play, we play. Play informs who we become. From almost the day we're born, when a mother and child lock eyes, it's known as bonding play. Eye contact and funny faces is the beginning of emotional expression. And of course, cooing and baby talk is the beginning of language and communication. Why have researchers found peekaboo play in 17 different diverse cultures all over the world? That's because a baby needs to learn that mom continues to exist even though she's no longer seen. The child psychologist Jean Piaget coined this object permanence. Researchers like Alan Shore at UCLA call this bonding play attunement, and he has done research to show that if for whatever reason this attunement doesn't happen, this bonding play doesn't happen because of drug addiction or mental issues, it could be a lot of things. If it doesn't happen, the child for the rest of their lives are more emotionally vulnerable, and they have difficulty forming healthy relationships as adults. Sadly, we know this in part from researchers who studied children in Romanian orphanages in 1989 when communism fell and Romania was forced to open their doors to the West, and they estimate that over 100,000 kids were left abandoned in these orphanages. And some of these orphanages had a mortality rate of nearly 40%. So think about that for a minute. These kids had food, water, shelter, and yet they still died. They died of lack of touch, a lack of connection, a lack of play. So let's take a look at what these kids missed. Sociologist and child development researcher named Mildred Parton gave us these 6 stages of play. We're going to go through the first 5 quickly and then focus more on the last one. The first is unoccupied play. That's sort of random movements from a baby or a very young child. They're just sort of discovering their world through movement. The second is solitary play, where they're a little older and they're playing with something and focused just on that thing, not on anyone else. There's onlooker play, which is the beginning of kids starting to look out from themselves to other kids, their peers. And onlooker play really happens in the child's mind, where they see kids playing and they're looking at the social dynamics of that and getting ready for the next step, which is parallel play, where they're playing with something near another child, but they're not engaging with that child at all. They're just focused on what they're doing. So it's parallel. Next leads to associative play, where it's the beginning of communication and interaction between the kids. They're still playing with what they're playing with, but now they're starting to interact. And finally, that leads to cooperative play. And you can see how if a parent pushes their kids into one of these stages too quickly, it can sort of backfire on them, right? Because they need all the skills that they're learning which lead up to cooperative play, which is really tough. tough for kids, right? It's the work of childhood. Someone, I forget who said that play is the work of childhood, because this is what they're learning in cooperative play. They're learning advanced skills like conflict resolution, turn-taking, problem solving. They're also forming relationships with their peers. So they're learning social skills. When my wife and I were first parents, we got lured into this competitive child comparison thing that new parents do, and we told ourselves we're not going to do that. But we had friends that were, that were proud parents, as we all are, and they would ask things like, when did Kate first crawl, walk, talk, read? Our Susie started reading it too. I have yet to see a college entrance exam, or a marriage proposal for that matter, that asks you, when did you start reading? Every institution of higher learning, and the institution of marriage for that matter, needs in it people who are well adjusted, right? So this is a report card accolade. It's a t-shirt, and you can probably find a coffee mug too. Plays well with others, right? That should be a parent's highest goal, because the consequences for kids who don't figure out how to do this are heartbreaking. According to researchers John Coie and Kenneth Dodge, kids who have not become socially integrated by the age of 4 and therefore are unaccepted by their peers are more aggressive for the rest of their lives. Without ever experiencing and adjusting to the positive and negative aspects of play, they lack the ability to gauge their emotions and their ability to handle stress. This is a frustrating part of being a play advocate, right? Because people who think play is frivolous are typically people that are very results-oriented, serious, and no nonsense, right? But the irony is they're not taking play seriously enough, because play is more nuanced than they know, and it's certainly not just one positive emotion after another, sunshine and silliness. When a child first learns to play peekaboo, it is an existential crisis. Mom is gone. Oh, there she is. Right? There's a pain point there from the earliest age. There's negative emotions that kids learn to deal with through play. And the critical cooperative play stage, man, that's hard. Kids are learning to share. They're learning how to deal with team dynamics. They're learning how to take turns. That's hard for a young kid, as evidenced by this poor guy. Maybe you're someone, or someone you know is not so rigid about play. They know play is important. They know that it's important that it is soft, still, and as silent as possible. Good luck with that. There's a form of cooperative play called rough-and-tumble play, and it is characterized by chase play, play fighting, and other agonistic behavior. And a key part of it that a lot of people miss is the fact that the participants of rough and tumble play are enjoying it. Look at the faces on these kids, right? They're enjoying it. So you would never break up this play fight, right? These two aren't about to kill each other. There's no one on the planet that would look at these two and say, "Oh, break it up. They're gonna kill each other." So if you wouldn't break up this fight, why would you break up this fight? The benefits of rough and tumble play are numerous. Self-regulatory skills, social competence, positive peer relationships, recognition of social signals, huge one. Physical development, improved social skills and cooperative skills. Self-handicapping, this is a big one. So in this photo, this little girl is much bigger than her little brother, right? So she needs to handicap herself, because if she always pins him when they wrestle, or she always blows by him in a race, or catches him every time they play a chase game, then she risks the play stopping because he'll be too frustrated. So she learns how to self-handicap, and really it's morality, it's fair play, and it allows the play to continue. A huge social skill. And it teaches negotiation. Sadly, a 5-year-old who never masters this type of play has a very hard time being accepted by his peers. Perhaps he was too aggressive and his behavior was never modified, or more likely he had a well-meaning parent or caregiver who stopped every single form of rough and tumble play because they misconstrued it as being violent or some sort of aggression that was bad for him. A very large part of play is dealing with a negative emotion, dealing with the negative emotions that come during play, because you're experiencing those negative emotions within a safe environment, the environment of play. And through that process, you're more able to learn the social skills, the interdisciplinary skills, your own self-regulation to deal and overcome those negative emotions. You can't protect kids from ever feeling the sting of, say, the loss of a game, everyone gets a trophy, or the experience of embarrassment over some sort of social play. It does the kids an injustice and a disservice. Overprotective parents remind me of a story by Dennis Merritt Jones, and the story goes like this. These scientists build biodomes because they wanted to grow the finest trees, right? They pumped purified air in there, and they had the purest of water, healthy soil, filtered light, zero pollution, and the trees were doing great, and they got to a certain age, and then they just fell over and died. Because the researchers didn't account for the fact that there's no wind in a biodome. And wind pushing against the tree causes it to grow deeper roots and become strong. So in this analogy, kids are like trees. They need an acceptable level of stress to make them strong, and if you try to wall them off, you make them weak. I can't be too hard on overprotective parents though, because people are having less kids nowadays, right? If you only have one kid, then sort of all your eggs are in that basket. I was raised number 5 in a family of 6 kids, so by the time my parents got to me, they were done with the whole parenting thing. I mean, I was on my own. That's not true. I had great parents. But it is true that at some point, you're also raised by your siblings, and rough-and-tumble play was a big part of my childhood, and even dangerous play, because we had lawn darts, for crying out loud. I mean, geez, a weighted spike that you lob in the air. What could possibly go wrong? We were a middle-class family, and we weren't poor, but we certainly weren't rich either. I remember taking a basketball that wouldn't hold air to my dad and saying, we need a new basketball, and he said, we can't afford that right now. And I remember 2 things. The first was, wow, we don't have as much money as I thought. And secondly, I thought, what sport or game could I invent with a basketball that wouldn't bounce? And we would do that all the time when we were kids. I remember making up games like one was called Leaf and Crash Course and Water War. And there's no question in my mind that if I was from a more affluent family and I didn't have these hand-me-down toys and some of these broken toys and had to sort of figure out for myself how to play and what to play with, there's no way that I would have become a game designer later in life, because I learned those skills at a very young age. I loved wiffle ball as a kid, absolutely loved it, played for hours in our backyard. And it's a sport made for confined spaces, because when you hit the ball, it doesn't go very far, and if it hits a window, it's not going to break it. I found out later that it was invented by a pitcher and his son, and the cool thing about it is they wanted to create a ball that would curve on its own. So anyone can throw a wiffle ball and make it curve 2 feet or more. I remember the foul poles were the mulberry tree in right and the clothesline pole in left. I don't remember many arguments over fair and foul balls, but I do remember a lot of arguments over balls and strikes. And that's because our strike zone was a taped box on a piece of plywood that was leaning against the side of our house. And that was there also because you didn't want to have dents in your aluminum siding. I learned that the hard way from my dad. Don't want to go there. But when a pitch was thrown and you didn't swing at it and it hit the plywood, there were a lot of arguments over did it fall in the box or did it hit outside the box, ball or strike. And it got so intense because we were pretty competitive kids that either we need to invent an instant replay machine or we needed a miracle, because our wiffle ball days were numbered. And that was about the time that I rediscovered the classic plastic strap woven folding aluminum lawn chair, or more specifically, the fact that a wiffle ball hitting said chair makes a very different sound than a wiffle ball hitting a piece of plywood. We used the lawn chair as our strike zone, as a clever way of using sound. If it made a thud, it was a ball. If it made a tink, it was a strike. Now, if you had asked me at the time, did you become an inventor at that moment? Of course the answer is no. I was just trying to solve a problem. I wanted the wiffle ball game to continue. But now I look back and I go, yeah, solving problems is a part of creating stuff. And it absolutely was the moment when I became an inventor. And I think about two other ways that my backyard wiffle ball days informed who I would become. The first thing I remember is sitting on our strike zone, right? It would be a really hot day and my mom would be like, you guys are gonna pass out, stop, take a break, have some lemonade. And I was sitting on the lawn chair, fantasizing about playing professional baseball, because that was my dream. That's role play, that's fantasy play. That's projecting yourself out into the future, right? Well, 14 years later, I signed a contract to play baseball in Mexico. Was it the bottom rung of professional baseball? Yes. But was I paid to throw a ball? Yes. Secondly, I remember the feeling of satisfaction when I came up with the idea for the lawn chair strike zone. That was creativity in solving a problem, as I mentioned, and it led me, I believe, to develop the skills to create new games. And eventually, 15 years later, I invented a game called Tribon with some college buddies, and it became our first successfully commercial game. The third thing that I sort of knew from an early age from those backyard wiffle ball games was the fact that I was infatuated by the ball itself. Why did it curve? How did it curve? Who invented it? My only clue was the side of the box. It said Wiffle Ball Incorporated, Shelton, Connecticut. And I remember wondering, geez, I'm just so curious as to how this thing came to be. Well, 30 years later, I ended up writing a book called Timeless Toys because I never lost that curiosity. And I got to tell the story of the Mulaney family and how they invented one of the greatest toys, in my opinion, ever to be created in wiffle ball. In his book play, Stuart Brown tells the story of Jet Propulsion Labs and how they had a problem in the 1990s because all the older engineers who had taken us to the moon were getting older and retiring, and they needed to be replaced by new engineers. But JPL faced a problem. The younger engineers, although they were very smart, couldn't solve problems as well as the older engineers. And collectively, they discovered that how you play as a kid informs how good you are at problem solving. There's something with your hands and the play of your hands that changes your brain. The older engineers worked on bikes, they made soapbox derby cars, they took apart clocks. And as Stuart Brown says, the hand is in search of a brain, and the brain is in search of a hand, and play is what brings those two things together. So now JPL, whenever they're hiring new engineers, they ask them detailed play histories. How did you play as a kid? You probably all saw this viral video that happened a few years ago.
I can't seem to get it in here. I tried to tuck it in here and it won't go on the top and it won't fit in the bottom. I don't seem to be able to get, excuse me, can you help me? Yeah, I can't seem to fit this in here. Turn it. What? Turn the bag. It just won't turn the bag, sir. Oh, okay, there it goes, yeah.
So this gentleman is not going to get a job at JPL anytime soon. But all joking aside, if as a little kid he got this, a sorting block set, he would have not been overwhelmed by the overhead compartment. I have a friend named Peggy Brown, and I have found, she's a toy designer too, we're in the toy industry together, and throughout my career in toys, and hers too, we've both discovered that play really informs who you become. We have a friend named John Spinello, and together we produced and directed a movie about him because he's a really interesting guy. In 1964, John was a student at the University of Illinois. He was an engineer student, and he was given the task of coming up with a toy or game. And he scored the highest grade in his class with this electric box. And how this worked was you took that metal probe that you see in the picture, and there's a top plate which you can see and a bottom plate which you can't, and you put the probe in and you touch the bottom plate, but you can't touch the sides of the openings in the top plate, because if you did, the circuit would be completed and a 12-volt lantern battery would power this incredibly loud buzzer that would startle you. And if you haven't figured it out already, this prototype ended up becoming the classic surgery-themed game Operation. In the movie, we asked him, how did you play as a kid? And he told us this story.
My buddy Bob and I, we lived by our wits and we played by our wits. And we were walking over this sewer grate. We looked down and there was money down there. Quarters, dimes, nickels. That was big. Now how can we reach way down and get it? Well, it was a hot summer day. So we got a great big branch and took some of the tar off the sidewalk, put it on the end of the stick, and fished out all these coins. We probably had 75, 80 cents worth of silver coins. We got the last one out, and this big, huge guy comes walking out of the building. "That's my money." I didn't think so. We had our money and ran. He couldn't catch us, no way.
So we asked John, did you remember this playing as a kid? And he said no. But you know that subconsciously, when he was in college and asked to come up with a game, you know, at least subconsciously, he thought about his Chicago days of running the streets and finding money at the bottom of a sewer. Just amazing that how we play informs who we become. So John had a very successful business career. He was in warehousing, and he sold his patent for operation for $500 and never made any more money on the game. But he was happy and content with the fact that the game entertained a lot of people. And in 2008, when the economy tanked, John lost his business, and we launched a CrowdRise campaign and asked the fans of Operation to help the inventor, and it was viral. It just went nuts. He was in the New York Times, covered by media outlets really all over the world. On Good Morning America, Jimmy Kimmel did a piece on him, and it was a happy ending, right? He got the money that he needed for his surgery, and we decided to greenlight a film to tell the story of how John got this money from the fans, and that was all it was going to be. The film was called Operation, but then something funny happened. We launched a website just for fans to email John and wish him well, thank him for inventing the game, and what we didn't expect was to get play histories from people. And we got letters like this. "I was always fascinated by the way it worked. I'm now doing a PhD in electronic engineering, and this kind of thing was exactly what made me start wondering how electricity worked. You truly created magic." Electric games are common to us now, right? Kids are playing with iPads and iPhones, and there's electricity everywhere. But in 1965, when Operation came out, it was one of the first electric games. In fact, the cover of the box had the electric game in the corner. And probably because of overprotective parents, Milton Bradley decided to get rid of that off the box shortly after the game launched. Maybe it was a little bit too scary. The other way you know you have an original Operation game, by the way, is the surgeon is flicking ashes in the face of the patient. But the cool thing was we started to get email from people entering the medical field. Nurses, doctors, physician assistants. We got this letter from a nurse. "I played with Operation for hours on end. Today I'm a nurse with grown children of my own. The game sparked my curiosity in science and learning." Dozens and we got probably 1,000 or more email, but dozens of letters from people that were in the medical field, and in their own words said they were absolutely influenced by the game Operation. Like this guy, Dr. Steven Stryker. So when he was a kid, Steve Stryker needed surgery, and it was apparently pretty serious and pretty scary. And an aunt gave him an Operation game as a, sort of a joke. Obviously there's humor in the game of Operation, to sort of calm his fears. And obviously he made it through surgery okay. And when we went to interview him, he took out the game from when he was a kid. And he wrote to John and said, "Thanks for all the joy you've provided, all the careers you've launched, and this is not a stretch, all the lives you've probably saved." So what does Stephen J. Stryker do today? He teaches surgery. He's a clinical surgery professor at Northwestern University. And the stories didn't end there. We got a letter from this doctor, Dr. Andrew Goldstone. He became a specialist in the throat and neck. And as he told us, there's delicate nerves that run inside and along the thyroid gland. And often a surgeon will hit one of those nerves inadvertently, and they can paralyze the vocal cords or make the patient hoarse. So it's pretty serious. And Dr. Goldstone had the idea of electrifying the nerves so that when a surgeon got too close to those delicate nerves during surgery, a buzzer would go off in the operating room. He called it the electroendotracheal tube, and told John in a letter that this device has been used in hundreds of thousands of cancer, thyroid surgeries all over the world. How we play informs who we become. Not every kid who plays operation is going to grow up to be a nurse or a doctor or a surgeon who teaches other surgeons, but the cool thing is some do. Not every kid that plays with Legos is going to grow up to be an engineer, but some will. The title of my talk is How We Play Informs Who We Become. And mostly I've been talking about kids, but you as an adult are still becoming. You are neotenous, and that means you're able to play throughout your entire lifespan. This is great news because kids are innately curious, and curiosity fosters play. None of us know where that curiosity may lead, but it's sure to be fun finding out.